ready to get going? Yes, sir. Okay, let's do this. It's 9 o'clock, so we'll call this meeting to order. We're going to do a formal roll call this morning, so Ms. King.
Yes, we'd like to do a roll call this morning. Chairman Mike Kilborn.
Here.
Vice Chair Dave Davis.
Here.
Commissioner Barry Keller.
Here.
Commissioner Michael Jordan.
Here.
Commissioner Megan Burney.
She is absent.
Called
in sick.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Okay, are there any changes to the agenda?
Just a clarification, item 6C, the drought update report. In the draft agenda report, we make note of a resolution that allows the city to go after grants. We will not be asking the commission to take action today. We weren't able to get that together, but we are trying to get to council soon, and I will talk briefly about it during the drought update and just let you know what it is. There isn't much controversy to it. It's just that we do want to get moving on that. That grant application was due, and we need to get that turned around.
Okay. All right. Item 4, public comment. Does anybody from the public have any comments? Doesn't look like it today. All right, we'll move on to item 5, consent items. We have the meeting minutes from the last meeting and resolution for approving Santa Barbara County's drought relief projects submittal to the state. Any comments, questions on either of those items? Do I have a motion to
Mr.
approve?
Chairman, I'll move approval of the meeting minutes. And then I do have a brief comment, but I'll wait till we deal with the minutes, I guess. Or
What?
we don't have to approve it because it's in the consent items. Well, at any rate, I was just going to note that on item 5B, there's a lot of very interesting information in there, a lot of which doesn't appear to have much to do with the city. And I didn't understand exactly what the point of sending that to a state agency was, or what we're actually hoping to accomplish by that.
Let me take a quick moment to talk a little bit about that. So there's been a big push to try and provide some financial relief as a result of this drought. And we've been talking with the Office of Emergency Services. And in fact, we've had council members and senators and board members from various water agencies involved in this effort. And where we landed was if there was consensus on some projects that would provide regional benefits, that OES was going to work to try and find some grant funding if there was some consensus on what those projects would be. And so this is basically the culmination of intensive weekly meetings starting in early January. And they've come to this conclusion that these projects listed here are ones that can be regionally supported. And so it's going back to all of the various agencies for approval of this list. And if approved by all the other agencies, the thought would be that there would be some level of grant funding coming to support those projects.
Mr. Chair, if the motion includes both items A and B, I would second that. I want to note that just B appears to be really an informational item. So it's really recommending to the council that they adopt a resolution.
That is correct.
Yeah. But anyway, if the motion includes both the full consent calendar, I
the motion
second
can
that.
include both of them.
Okay. We have Keller, Davis. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. Excellent. All right. Does that answer your questions on
Yeah,
that?
thank you.
Okay. Super. Okay. We'll move on to item 6A, the long-term water supply plan adaptive management. Ms. Bjork and Mr. Ferguson are going to present today.
Chair Kilborn, commissioners, we have the fortunate situation today to have some very knowledgeable staff who were here when the 2011 long-term water supply plan was adopted, and they've agreed to come back and talk about the adaptive management strategy that was part of that plan. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca Bjork, our Public Works Director.
Good morning, Water Commissioners. It's nice to be here with you. I'm Rebecca Bjork, Public Works Director, and I wanted to take an opportunity today to just revisit the long-term water supply plan As Commissioner Keller knows, we spent a lot of time working on this between 2009 and 2011 to take a comprehensive look at our water supplies and evaluate them in conjunction with the general plan to ensure that we would have adequate supplies to meet projected growth and that we would have a strategy for addressing periods of water shortage. And Mr. Ferguson was absolutely instrumental in this work, and he's going to walk us through the presentation that we gave to a work session at Council just prior to adopting this plan to sort of explain how the plan is structured and how it is supposed to be implemented, where we are with regard to working in conjunction with the plan, and where there may be future need to change things. What I'd like to say is that, believe it or not, really none of the premise for this plan has changed. The water supply scenarios on which we built this plan remain the same. Our allocations for state water and Kachuma water and our groundwater assumptions have not changed. The one item that really did change with regard to our adapting to this plan was the severity of the drought. We planned for the worst case drought that we used as a basis for the plan was the drought in the 1950s, which was the drought of record and a 5-year drought. Mr. Ferguson and I were concerned that we wanted to have a conservative plan. We were also concerned with the cost and time it would take to put Desal back online, as that was our drought supply. So we, in our water supply planning, stretched it out to a 6-year drought. Unfortunately, that seemed to be too realistic. It seems now to be too realistic. But the one thing that is not consistent with it is that our water supply projections were based on what water is available and the temperature that was happening during previous droughts, and that, as we now know, has been severely worse than what was previously. So when we are through this, we know there are a couple of things that are coming our way, including a likely change in Kachuma allocations. The state water order is out, a draft order is out, and we know that reduces our water somewhat. We're waiting for a biological opinion that could have significant effects. And then we really need to go back and reset our baseline for what is the drought of record. None of those things is ready yet. We haven't got those determinations, and in fact, we don't even know what the drought of record is because we're still in it. So at this time, we just wanted to explain how the adaptive management policies and the plan for use that we set up in the current long-term supply plan are being applied in this plan. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Ferguson.
Thank you, Rebecca, and to the commission members, Councilmember White. I think one thing to introduce the overall approach was that a plan is a plan, and we know that it changes over time as we go through it, but the goal was to give us enough options to deal with things, and that reflects what Rebecca was saying as the introduction. So, again, this is a presentation that was given to the joint session of the City Council and the Water Commission in 2011. Just prior to adoption, the information here is essentially the same as was adopted in the long-term plan. Minor changes here and there, but this was very late in the process, so it's pretty complete. The overview is pretty self-explanatory. I'll try not to dwell too much on things in the past, to look more towards what might inform us for the future. We wanted to always give the background we had. It was a simple water supply back then. Moving forward, we went through a number of planning exercises and legal issues, and another drought ended up with a water supply that was much more diverse, much more complex, and that was the basis of the supply planning component of the water supply plan. This chart, I think, is always useful to remember where we've been, where we were, for instance, in the 80s before the 1990s drought, what that drought did to us in terms of demand, how it affected things going forward. And now we have another drought to add to that chart, and you'll recognize that one, I'm sure. I think it continues to be an important perspective to have, to recognize that our prime issue is going to be drought. Again, looking at the supplies and planning what we could get from them, looking forward to Kachuma, some estimate of the reduction entitlement that might come just from a sedimentation accumulation in the reservoir, not knowing what kind of numbers to put on the other issues that Rebecca mentioned. And this is a reminder. Sure. This is a reminder of the important role that Kachuma plays. It was true then, it's true now. We count on it year to year. It is a multi-year supply. When it doesn't rain above average amounts of rainfall, approximately, we end up on the down end of that curve there. And again, we have another one to add to that chart as well. Gibraltar, the issue there is the pass-through agreement. It's turned out to take a lot longer to implement than we had planned, but we're still pushing ahead with that. And Mission Tunnel is just a reference that that's an important, minor but important part of our supply. This was the discussion about State Water Project. We wanted to acknowledge the importance of the pipeline, not just the water, because the pipeline is a connection to other sources of water. That's proven to be very important and very useful to us in the current drought as well. The planning here was based on what we thought was a conservative estimate in comparison to some of the other estimates that have been made by DWR about average annual deliveries. One thing about State Water Project assumptions was that we assumed that the drought would not be coincident north and south. Turned out in this drought that was the case. That's part of what affected us in a pretty significant way. Although the fact that the pipe was there allowed us then to fill it with other water and offset that. So it's something to keep in mind in the future, but it turned out not to be as critical an issue as it might have been if we didn't have that access to other water. Just to recognize the important role of groundwater as well, not only as a part of the supply, but also a catastrophic interruption source of water. If something happens to the tunnels, that's one of our only sources of water on this side of the mountain. Those numbers were used for the planning to how much we could get out of the drought, out of the groundwater basins during the drought. And that continues to be an important part of what we're doing. And there's modeling work with USGS that's just about finished up now. And that'll help us nail down where we go in the future. Recycled water system, another chunk. Again, this is just an example of how diverse the city's water supply is. One of the prime issues on recycled water was the problems we were having with water quality, and it was leading to this kind of growth in the amount of blend water used. We've come out of that to a large extent now. Those issues are mostly solved. We still have a blending issue related to salt, but the plan did identify the available supplies, and including 300 acre-feet of new demand that we're looking to connect once we can get the supply settled in on water quality. Again, a little bit more on the blending issue and a policy that was included in the plan about addressing blending in the recycled water system. And desalination, I might phrase it a little differently. The first bullet may be expensive but reliable instead of the way it is there. But the point is that it's going to be there when we need it, and we just have to plan for the cost of it and work it into the financial plan. And again, this echoes the plan to avoid using it until year 6. And part of the way of doing that was to extend the Kachuma deliveries out through a 6-year planning period by taking advantage of availability for carryover so that we can avoid the process of starting that desal reactivation in just after the completion of year 2 of a drought. That was reflective of what happened in 2002 and 2003. There was a dry period there. We were about ready to make some significant commitments to desal reactivation almost just a couple years after the Kachuma had spilled.
Mr. Chairman? Mm-hmm. So in revising the plan, presumably due to the fact that we are rebuilding the desal plant, we won't have an item that says we're going to need to reactivate it in the future.
I think that remains to be seen. I think it's all part of what parameters we use to plan for the future.
Commissioner Keller, we're going to get to the policies, but one of the policies that was adopted, recommended by Water Commission, and actually very strongly recommended by Commissioner Smith, as you may recall, and adopted by Council, was that if desal is used for anything other than a drought supply, a new drought supply be developed. So desal remains in our current plan a drought supply, and so when we relook at the new plan and take a look at what the role of desal is, it's possible that the next increment of desal will be that replacement drought supply, or that will manage our other supplies conjunctively. But again, that policy about desal being a drought supply is in the plan.
This is big, both in terms of a long-term approach and during those periods when we have drought. I don't have to tell anybody in this room the importance of what our savings from the community has done for us in terms of planning. And not so evident is the long effort over the years to make our day-to-day, year-to-year efficiency grow and get more efficient in our use of water. That's reflective of the California Urban Water Conservation Council statewide guidance and leadership on that. The city's progressive state-of-the-art water conservation program dating back to the 80s, and the state regulation to reduce 20% by 2020. And that's sort of being superseded by other policies at the state level, but the concept is the same. All of these things, along with plumbing codes and appliance standards, are pointing us in the direction of more efficient water use, and that's going to help us. The technical evaluation that was done was a part of that effort, and it led us to basically this information here. The line that was incorporated into the plan was the orange line on the bottom that reflected the city's water conservation program and acknowledged the effects of the plumbing codes and the appliance standards, which were substantial. They were approaching 1,000 acre-feet per year of demand in the long-term projection. That, coupled with the additional efforts on water conservation from our program, led us to a demand curve that was declining over the planning period. And again, that's important in terms of having to procure new supplies or avoid that by increasing our year-in, year-out efficiency. Again, it's separate from that extraordinary demand reduction that happens during the drought. Both of those are critical components for our water supply system.
Those curves are very smooth curves compared to the actual shape of the demand that we saw after the drought, which is a lot more erratic, which led us at one point in time to consider a 5-year moving average rather than the actual plot of year-to-year variation. And the 5-year moving average presumably is a lot more comparable to these nice smooth curves.
Yeah, absolutely. This is for the average planning approach, but we always look ahead in our urban planning and our annual water supply plans to what happens if we're in a drought or about to move to the next level of a drought. That's how we address that type of sporadic variation, although we still never know what the next year is going to be. And so in terms of what that long-term normal year demand is, that's what this was intended to address, recognizing that it could be very variable.
And I want to point out this was a projection from 2010 looking forward, so it would be essentially an average. It wouldn't reflect an actual. It's a little confusing because we now have dates up there that are historical for which we have real numbers, but this was at the time at which we were contemplating it.
One other thing on this, the green line is a projection as if the plumbing codes and appliance standards were not in effect. So it's not a real scenario, but the point is to notice the difference between the green and the blue. The blue is only the effects of the plumbing code. So it's sort of institutionalized demand reduction. This is important because we never know how things are going to perform for us during a drought. We add a safety margin rather than trying to add that to each individual supply source. It's an overall safety margin that provides a buffer in case things don't go as planned. So I think we've hit most of these. The 6-year critical drought period, that was to extend that planning period for desal and also be in conformance with state's guidance on climate change. They're projecting a 20% increase in frequency and duration of the critical drought periods. The process of using the available data we had and trying to project that forward. And again, the point about the value of long-term conservation and the extraordinary demand reduction during drought. This was our drought that we planned for. Things, as we pointed out, have turned out to be more severe than that. Hotter, drier weather going into the drought the first few years. And in response to that, we've gone deeper into the plan. But the plan has been able to guide us to the sources that we have. And then we use the real-life circumstances that occur at the moment to manage those sources and adapt to what conditions we have. And there have been a lot of things to adapt to. This was the long-term look at, over a modeling period, how the water supply performs and the critical drought there in the middle.
I think this is a great chart. It takes some explaining, so let me just explain what it is. You're looking at two things there. The dotted red line is the water that we project to have in storage in our groundwater basins. And you can see that we try and keep it, that's the index on the right. I believe, and my eyes aren't that good. And then the solid bars add up to just less than 14,000 to 15,400 acre feet of supply that we're planning for, and then they're stacked to show how our individual supplies fit in to allow us to meet that supply. And I think the important thing there is recognizing that we are planning to have lowered supplies during periods of drought and draw down that groundwater basin in order to be able to support even those lowered supplies. One of the things that's a little difficult to see is how the year-to-year in there and the carryover affects our ability to continuously meet that 15.4 in demand.
This is a close-up of that critical drought period from the chart before. And this is a chart that shows the estimated carryover available from Kachuma that we could take advantage of for storage. And
State water.
I'm sorry, state water, yes. As a part of using supplemental water supplies, which in fact we were able to get going on in the early part of the drought in order to have that available if the state water supplies dropped off.
And again, I just want to reemphasize, this was an important part of the planning policy that we, and the exercise we did was historically excess state water had not been an effort to try and secure that for future supply needs. And one of the shifts for this long-term supply plan was to identify that was a resource that needed to try to be captured and reserved to be available during times of drought. And in fact, at the start in 2011, going into this drought, I think we had 2,000 or was it 4,000 acre feet of water from state water from previous year allocations stored elsewhere in the state. So I had already started implementing that practice.
1,300? No, when we went into 2013, when the drought really, we had quite a bit stored. Mm-hmm.
So, summary of the key policy issues. I think we've hit all those. And
since we're going through policy, just walk through them.
okay, the combination of the state leadership and the local conservation program and recycle water was able to offset a lot of our potable water demand. That's been important all along. 6-year planning period involving water banking and purchases of water and delivery through state water project facilities. Taking advantage of that extraordinary conservation during the drought and recycle water expansion to grab another 300 acre feet of demand there. Highlighting the blending issue with the recycled water and making note of sedimentation management as an ongoing issue with reservoirs, obviously with Gibraltar, but also we need to keep that in mind in terms of Kachuma as well. And this was just the planning schedule moving forward. Old news. So I'd be happy to take any other questions you have at this point, and we appreciate your interest.
Question down there?
So
from the vantage that we have now. Critical drought. One of the pieces that's a variable that I expect is not that we're not seeing anything about here is the spot market purchases, which clearly, as Ms. Bjork is saying, was a critical factor in our getting through this as well as we are.
It probably wasn't alluded to as specifically as that, but that was the key behind the concept of the pipe being available from.
Exactly.
Because if we're going to get any of that water, it's going to most likely come through that pipe.
Right.
Can you go back to
And also that water, that supplies were purchased and stored in the AVEC and such like. And again, Rebecca mentioned something to that effect. But now sort of in the 2020-ness of hindsight, and hopefully, after this weekend, we're going to be in a more comfortable, I'm betting big on this storm, so that we may be getting some real relief here. But looking backwards, is there a different strategy or that would go into this spot market or using our conveyance, our limited conveyance, sooner in the cycle to be backfilling Kachuma and providing us obviously one of the constraints is that the pipe, no matter how much water we have, we can only bring in a certain amount at a certain rate. So it's just any thoughts that our technical team might have on that same, would do the same thing again, or would we do anything any differently?
Councilmember White, I think that if you look, I put back the chart that looks at our supply planning. This was from the plan for critical drought years. And if you see that very top bar that is hatched, it specifically says drought supplies, but doesn't say what those are. It was recognition that those drought supplies would be potentially that spot water or that banked water or something, not or desal, but recognizing that those were drought supplies outside of our regular water supplies. So the plan and the use of banked water and spot market purchases is very much in line with what this plan had anticipated. I think it would be a useful exercise to see how and when to deliver water to Kachuma. One of the challenges, and it's more of a regulatory hurdle, and I think it's an unanticipated or unplanned challenge, is that our water in Kachuma is at much more risk than it is anywhere else. If we bank it in groundwater, we have a little loss. If we bank it in San Luis, unless San Luis spills, in which case it's usually a period where there's lots of water available, we have little loss. And we don't pay for those supplies until we need them. So there's little cost in having them there. If we deliver it to Kachuma, we're paying for it upon putting it there, and we immediately start losing it to evaporation, and it's at risk of spill, and it's the highest priority for spill. I mean, I think some of the policies statewide and in our own local management really need to be revisited to encourage conservation rather than use it or lose it. But our current water policies do encourage use it or lose it. The new water in displaces the water you might have saved there. So we will need to reevaluate that, but I think it's also a state conversation. I do know I was talking to the chair of the State Water Board and said, you recognize what this use it or lose it policy is doing in terms of encouraging conservation in San Luis. This was just before San Luis spilled. And she said she was completely unaware of it. So I think it's just a conversation we need to start to have at a much broader level.
And we did, we certainly will look at it even more, but yes, we were closely looking at when to time our deliveries of state water, and given the way that the current evaporation was kind of put together, we were looking at losing 70, 80, 90% of the water that we would import because of how the calculations are arrived for the evap. So exactly speaking to that, maybe that's a great opportunity as part of the contract renewal to try and address that so that Kachuma does become more of a favorable location for us to start making those deliveries earlier to the lake, because they will actually benefit us. I mean, it's one thing for the lake to spill. I think I can live with losing water that gets spilled. I think losing it to evap when I really need it is gets down to that. Does that really make sense? So, and I think we're going to be looking, potentially there's been, as you know, discussions already at CCWA about potentially some long-term contracts to have water or purchase agreements in place such that we can buy water during drought cycles, and there's not a lot of this frenzy about the market and trying to get in there. You have maybe some agreed upon pricing based on maybe the state water allocation, things that we can get in place that I think will help. And then of course groundwater banking. I think we've learned a tremendous amount about how these groundwater banks work, and some are more risky, some cost more money, some are more obviously reliable. We can count on that kind of stuff, and so I think continuing to probably diversify the groundwater banking opportunities that come across with CCWA will also put us in a better position next time around.
Thank you. And you discussed evaporation. We have seen and I totally appreciate that the state participation, the state engagement of our problems, we are a unique situation here. We're experiencing it with just by being the last bit of severe drought left in the state of California. And I would say that if you were to look at our proportions, that is to say, we're used to getting 18 inches of rain, and whereas Mojave, which may still be in drought, is they went from 7 inches to 3 inches, or 3 inches to 1.5, or whatever they did, but we went from 18 to 5 or whatever. But that the evaporation is one area where that's changed now, and that we do it a little differently than we did when we started the drought out of Kachuma. Isn't there some truth to that? And maybe you could explain that.
There is, and it's temporary. I mean, it is temporary how it's set up right now, and it was meant to kind of try and speak to that, because as we delivered water to the lake, if they didn't change the formula, basically we were going to be losing 60-70% of the water we were bringing into the lake. And so the Bureau seceded to at least having the minimum pool, which was now the largest body of water there, take its own evaporation. But I think long term, that necessarily isn't the simple answer. I think we really need to be looking at a whole different formula for how evap is handled on the lake, such that it does encourage storage.
And that's sorry, Mr. Chair, so is that a state level thing, or is that specific to the Kachuma system and doing those agreements and contracts and such like?
It would be a part of the contract renewal for Kachuma, yeah.
The State Water Project sort of assumes the losses ahead of making the allocations. So it preloads the losses. Kachuma postloads the losses.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair, comment while this chart is up. We've certainly seen that basically similar kind of chart changing almost monthly, and another color appearing at the top, which is red. But I think the fact that we had this chart as part of the plan points out that one reason we've done so well is because we did have a plan, and this is it. So.
And Commissioner Keller, we just wanted to show you a slide that shows a comparison of the planned supply versus the actual manner in which we've used the supply to sort of reiterate that point, which is we've followed the plan, but it has looked somewhat different. So on the left is that chart that you saw from the supply planning, and on the right is the actual as far as we are through 2016, and then what we're looking at for 17 and 18. So you can see the bars are still the same colors, but the proportions of bars are significantly different. And that reflects the severity of the drought, but it does show that we were using the supplies in the same manner that we had planned to, where we're bringing in those drought supplies in the later years, counting on conservation. And then what you aren't seeing in the plan that you do see in the projection is the shortage, because we are now going out 7 years. And things are worse than planning assumptions.
Thanks.
So one thing I'm struck with every time I see this is the growing yellow part for groundwater, and then I guess the assumption that something will happen after year 7 or 8 that will actually refresh that groundwater, where that may or may not be true. And so are we any closer to having a discussion not on direct potable reuse, but on indirect, where we would actually build conveyance, say, out of treated water and get it back up to groundwater basins for I guess injection would be the term there, but where it would actually then, do the horizontal travel for the 30 or 60-day requirement and then be available to come back out of the ground. And it would just be a continuing loop. You'd reduce the water going into the bay. You'd have that source to go back to your groundwater basins rather than cross your fingers that Mother Nature is really going to replenish your groundwater basin.
We really queued it up. That's exactly what we're going to be talking about in 6B today.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we
All
would
right.
we would go into that exact situation. But kind of going back to what you were saying earlier with the groundwater basin, that is what we've been talking about, is how do we, given that we're projecting out that groundwater basin being exhausted without significant improvements in our surface water supplies, what were we going to do? And that's where additional desal was potentially going to be necessary so that we could rest those basins. Given that we've gotten some rainfall, hopefully we'll get significantly more over the next month and a half. That might put us in a position, because I am very eager to rest that groundwater basin. It's tired.
And
Go
thank
ahead.
you, Commissioner Jordan, for taking me back to my favorite chart, because this again shows how the plan was anticipating that question. And you'll see the yellow bar on there is the groundwater, and you'll see much more extensive yellow bars during the period of drought in the planning. And then the red dotted line, as I indicated, is the groundwater levels. You see we draw it down very significantly, and then it is recovering after that, and that's through the diminishment of the size of that yellow bar. But that really requires that other supplies come in to take the place of continuing that pumping.
And historically, that shows that whatever the period of time that is horizontally, that Mother Nature has restored naturally the groundwater.
Right.
Are we past that historically now in year 7 or going into year 8? And are we in uncharted territory as to whether we can assume that nature will naturally replenish the level of groundwater to a needed level before the next drought cycle?
Those are different questions. Mm-hmm. The first one is, are we past it yet? No.
Okay.
We're still better off than we were in 92, and especially the Foothill Basin is better off than we were in the 50s, which was very bad, I must say.
Okay.
The question about how will Mother Nature replenish that groundwater before the next drought cycle, it depends when that is.
Right.
I mean, if that's 2 years from now, no.
Okay.
If it's 10 years from now, yes.
Okay.
So, Mr. Hagmark's going to be talking about opportunities for potable reuse in the next presentation, and we'll discuss that in some depth.
Okay, thanks.
In terms of Mother Nature replenishing the groundwater basins, the way these basins work is that up at the top of each basin is where the productive aquifer zones sort of daylight, and so we actually get mostly recharged by running water down the creeks in those parts of the basin. And we had a program for many years to trickle water down the creeks specifically for recharging the basin. It also kept the creeks nice and wet, and so the creeks people liked it and thought they owned it. But really it was a groundwater recharge strategy where we were helping Mother Nature, and presumably we, at such point in time that we have water available to do it, we can do that again.
All right. Nope, I don't think we have any other questions. Thank you very much. All right. Super. We'll move on to item number 6B now. Subsurface intake and potable reuse feasibility study update.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, just want to kind of set the groundwork for this presentation. I'm hoping for feedback on this presentation. I'm going to call it its trial run. I am gearing up to make this presentation again to Council, and then finally to the Regional Water Quality Control Board. This is a requirement under our amended permit for our MPDS permit. And as you know, we've been talking about this, and in particular, I know we did report it out on the subsurface intake work, but we have yet to, I think, meaningfully talk about potable reuse. So I've tried to kind of combine those both in here. Welcome your questions, welcome your feedback. keep in mind, I tried to make this something that we could move along and not get too bogged down in. We have extensive information available online for this. All of the studies, all the comments we got from the public, technical advisory panel is all available. The meetings we had were all recorded. So for those who are really interested in getting more information on this, we have it. This wasn't intended to go in and talk about every single little thing because we wouldn't have time today. So how did this all start? Well, this was first kind of shaped, I want to say, at a city council meeting on September 23rd, 2014, when we first took the big step to move forward with desal. And with that, this was, council wanted to see us also exploring, in addition to the need for desal, how we might mitigate the impacts to the ocean, and more importantly, what other alternatives, aka potable reuse, could also be explored. And so this is what started it, and then it did ultimately get wrapped in as part of the NPDES permit, as I mentioned. The scope for this was to identify feasible alternatives. The scope was not to determine the best alternative. As I'll probably say over and over in this information is really, the value of this information is really going to come about as we head into doing the next long-term water supply update. This information will be a starting point for us as we start to identify what our needs are going forward. We had structured this. We do have a deadline, which is to report to, by June 30th of 2017, we need to report out to the regional board. And so it has been a fairly aggressive schedule, getting a work plan in place and approved by the regional board staff. We submitted that in August, and we did receive approval on that. And then subsequent meetings on subsurface in January of 2016, and then most recently on subsurface in late October. The work plans define how the studies are to be conducted. There are 7 sections to the plan, basically laying out how the information is going to be gathered, and that ultimate plan was approved by the regional board on October 20th. The work has been broken down into 3 technical memorandums, hereforth called TMs, and basically this is how the information was kind of gathered and identified. In TM1, it provides us study goals and approach. We evaluating alternatives, the core principle being here to replace the desal using a screened open ocean intake. What are the alternatives for that? And so that was the main objective. And first was to evaluate the technical feasibility of that. Items passing that technical feasibility would then move on to evaluating the social, economic, environmental feasibility of those alternatives. Developing this information, again, is to inform future studies. This was not intended to be the end of this discussion. We did, as part of these, want to understand what the maximum yield from these technically feasible options would be. And then in TM2, we wanted to identify all of the regulatory and permitting requirements as a result of these different feasible options, technically feasible options. And as you can see, there are many agencies involved in this. And so we gathered basically the known regulations from all of these agencies and what the hurdles would be in implementing any of these different viable alternatives. And then technical memorandum 3, we present the basis of design for the alternatives and then the initial screening results. Basis of design included an analysis of the maximum yield, even if the yield is not sufficient to fully replace the desal screened open ocean intake or the desal plant production. This was the current screened intake is, and the permitted capacity of the facility is 10,000 acre feet a year. And so that was the goal of this feasibility study, was to identify a source that could replace that. Alternatives fell under the following categories: infeasible or not feasible, potentially feasible. This was something that came out of our discussions with the technical advisory panel, that it is technically feasible but does not meet the study's goals, and then potentially feasible. Only the potentially feasible alternatives were evaluated for social, environmental, and economic feasibility. This was part of that approval we got from the regional board. So, project capacity. It's getting back to what was the goal of the study. It was to replace the existing screened open ocean intake. And that 10,000 acre feet a year correlates to a design capacity of just shy of 16,000 gallons per minute. The assumption was based on the RO recovery of 45% of the seawater pumped through there, and the volume of raw water needed for pretreatment and backwashing. So site alternatives, we looked at both onshore and offshore considerations. It depended on the intake technology, and we did provide a buffer of going a half mile offshore, because that was property that the city currently has an agreement to use, and basically a state lands lease, and anything past that requires special acquisitions. And then in addition, that's generally where there is a significant fault offshore, which creates any issues crossing that fault.
Could you go back to the map? Okay. The 103 South Cayucita the Chavez, I don't remember what that in there for.
That was property that was looked at because it's potentially coming up for sale. It might serve some need in this project. Basically, what this is just doing is setting the stage for all the different areas that we looked at that could potentially be used as part of a feasible alternative to our seawater intake.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, regarding the offshore fault that Josh just mentioned, that was something that was shown in older USGS reports off there. I think the conclusion of the study and the technical advisory panel's review of it is that it's very unlikely that that fault exists, and we should not really include its existence in our understanding of the geologic regime.
Yeah, I think we concluded that if that was the only criteria by which it got eliminated, that we'd want to do extensive, offshore work to find where that fault exactly lies.
I got a quick question just about the original desal plant. Was it sized based on the pipeline capacity, the original intake, or
the pipeline that was put in was based on a design capacity of 10,000 acre feet a year. Mm-hmm. So the various alternatives that we looked at included vertical wells, lateral beach wells, radial collector wells, slant wells, subsurface infiltration galleries, and we looked at both onshore and offshore infiltration galleries, and then the horizontal directionally drilled wells. So these were, again, the presentation that we have and the report that we have go into extensive detail on all of these different options, but those were what the major technology that we felt could compete. Conceptual designs developed for alternatives based on the greatest production capacity if unable to meet 10,000. We looked at over 9,000 linear feet of beach available for some subsurface intake development, and it included about 5,300 feet of East Beach, 1,300 feet of West Beach, and 2,400 feet of Ledbetter Beach. Again, we did not, as part of this phase, did not look at the economic impacts of, putting wells and equipment on the beach. This was just to look at the technical feasibility of it. We did not look at condemnation, taking of any property. This was all supposed to be, we're looking at available public property. Assumed reuse of existing intake pipeline. So in summary, what we came up with is that the only two technologies or approaches that would produce the desired 16,000 gallons per minute was a subsurface infiltration gallery and the horizontal directionally drilled wells. The other alternatives, varying capacities, which may be important down the road when we update our long-term water supply plan and we make a determination that much less water is needed from desal. You could revisit these various alternatives and what might be involved in them. But for this planning of this study, these were the only two that met the criteria of capacity. In summary, we had a screening criteria, and I apologize, the intent here was just to show the screening criteria that we went through. There were, I think, 12 criteria, and at the end of the day, we didn't have any of the options met the feasibility criteria of this study. Now, there are things that were close, and one of the things that we felt as probably the most viable option was the horizontal directional drilling, and the reason that that option was dismissed is because it hasn't proven itself as a reliable technology. It is still it's still being tested. There isn't a good test case for it right now, but I think this is the technology that we would likely want to keep our eye on, as it probably has the least impactful approach and best opportunity for success. The HDD wells passed all of the initial, there is no current experience in California or the U.S. with this kind of an intake. There is 10 years of experience globally, but it's been very inconsistent in its performance. And in fact, the technical advisory panel that was reviewing this similar intake for the Huntington Beach desal plant ruled this out as not feasible as well because of its unproven track record. There is a facility, San Pedro de Pinatar in Spain, that is using this technology, but they're currently not planning to use it for any expansion of their plant because they've seen diminished and challenging issues operationally with it. So, no alternatives initially passed the screening criteria. One alternative was constrained by seismic and oceanographic factors. 4 alternatives impacted by sensitive habitat areas, and 5 alternatives had design and construction constraints. There currently is a plan to use this HDD technology at a pilot project in Camp Pendleton, and so that's going to be an interesting project that we can watch and see how that plays out. So that completes the subsurface intake, and I believe the Water Commission received probably we did a much more in-depth presentation on this before, but happy to answer any questions before going on to potable reuse.
So what's the problem with HDDs? They're sucking sand in, the machinery breaks down. I mean, what's an overview of why they just don't work? Or the
part of it
ones that
has
are
been,
out there?
I think, fouling of because it's basically a porous pipe that you're putting in, and so they trying to get that material to work, and how exactly do you back flush it? Because after a while, pulling stuff down, you're going to just get clogging and impaction, and so you just continue to get more and more diminished capacity through the lines.
On paper, it looks good, starts well, but then you continually have to up the flushing or up the maintenance, and
Right, I don't
it
think
takes time away from drawing the water in, right?
I don't think they've figured out how to flush it. So
Okay.
it's kind of a terminal thing. It just continues to get worse and worse over time at this point.
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, my impression, I work with a couple of guys that are on the technical advisory panel on the slant well project up in Monterey Bay is that actually drilling those horizontal wells, the technology is very shaky to do that at all. And it's very hard to drill sideways. And some types of drilling requires getting a pilot hole out in the ocean and actually pulling the drill from the far end, but that hasn't worked out to be very feasible either.
Different than the oil industry uses or has used?
It's similar to what the
Has
oil
the same
industry
name,
uses.
slant, right? That's all I know, right?
Well, the slant drilling would be at an angle into a pile of sand, and that's what we're doing up in Monterey. The horizontal drilling is actually horizontal, where you go down in a vertical hole and then drill out sideways from that.
Okay.
And it's the latter one that's had a lot of problems.
Commissioner Keller brings up a good point. One of the challenges with the HDD is what you're trying to do, and I think this is part of the challenge, is you're trying to get in this thin lens of productive sand. It's really what you're trying to get in. You don't want to be too deep, and you don't want to be too, because you don't want to run into groundwater either. So that's going to exacerbate a onshore groundwater situation. And so trying to stay within that lens, a certain depth, I think that's where it gets, if you got more area to kind of, I guess, for the bit to wander, I guess it's less of a problem. But I think that's, you don't want any of these drilling muds that they use to seep through the seafloor either. So it's kind of trying to strike that balance. So if there's no further questions, I'll move on to the potable reuse study.
I have one other question, Mr. Chairman. In the slant test well program up there in Monterey, the lead agency is the Public Utilities Commission. And I just wondered how in all that big list of agencies that we have to deal with, we managed to escape the PUC.
Yeah, I don't know that they have any. Maybe Ms. Bjork can speak to that.
I believe it's because the agency doing the project up there is a private water company, so they're regulated by the PUC. That's my guess.
That is true. Yeah. Thanks.
So the basis design for the potable reuse, we looked at different applications. We looked at non-potable reuse, which is basically the recycled water facility that we currently have. We looked at indirect potable reuse, and then, of course, direct potable reuse. Water quality and treatment needs, treatment water production capacity, surface properties, and hydrologic considerations, available project sites, project life, and then, of course, reliability. As with the subsurface, our plan was to offset or eliminate the need for the 10,000 acre feet from intake, screened open ocean intake. The challenge with potable reuse is that we also have to, we're already using 1,400 acre feet for the recycled water system. So it's really that we'd be looking for 11,400 acre feet of water to ultimately be equivalent if we were to divert this water. We did look at El Estero's flow characterizations, annual, daily, and hourly flows to help figure out how much water, wastewater in this case, was available. I'll have to say that they came back with the average daily flows being 7.73 MGD, and currently, as you all know, that isn't what we're seeing. We're seeing closer to 6, high 5s is what we've been seeing during this drought. And so I think the numbers in here, and we got this from the technical advisory panel, is very optimistic. You know, again, I was okay with leaving this in here because I think the timing of potable reuse is still many years out in the future, and you know, maybe wastewater flows will be increasing by then. But I certainly think this gives a very optimistic view of how much water might be available going forward. So with this, and again, this is a light version of this, is just showing some of what they looked at. And Commissioner Jordan, this kind of speaks to what you were talking about here. IPR, the indirect potable reuse alternatives, looked at the two main groundwater basins, Storage Unit 1 and then the Foothill Basin, and exactly how that might be configured to support some type of injection. And some of the bigger challenge that we ran into is for storage unit 1, I think there ended up being the need for about 12 injection wells. Each one of these wells you can probably consider is at least a $2 million well. But then the property to place those wells. And as the technical advisory panel pointed out, there's numerous challenges with that water wanting to come back up to the surface. So wanting to avoid hydraulic, it's almost like fracking in the sense that you're putting treated water down there, but you're putting it under pressure to make it go down there. And certainly there is opportunities for it to come back up. And so there's a lot of risk associated with that. Limited opportunities to do it in foothill, and that's just speaking to the injection part. Then you got to get to the extraction part to really take advantage of that. We currently have groundwater production about 2,000 acre feet a year, so to fully maximize the use of IPR, we would need to triple our groundwater production really to be able to maximize that use. And so basically what we came back to, and the technical advisory panel agreed, is, we're the classic case where IPR is just a real challenge here. It makes sense in Goleta, it makes sense in Carpinteria, where you have, much, I think they're topographically aren't as challenged as us. They have larger open spaces where they could do surface applied, recharge basins. But the city and its just general topography just don't lend. In particular, the structure of its groundwater basins, the defined lenses that we have just don't lend itself well to IPR. So current practice by the city, but of course it has its limited uses. And what we did with the study is we did look at combinations where we did some IPR and some non-potable reuse applications. And when with this, we would look to consolidate that equipment. One of the challenges, as you know, we've been dealing with at El Estero is a lack of space. So if we're going to build a facility like this, being able to consolidate all that onto one site. It just walks through the IPR process that we had, is currently dictated actually in Title 22, just how it would look. I'm not going to go in great detail on that today. And then DPR and what this would look like. I've just recently met with Kurt Souza, who's our regional Division of Drinking Water contact, and he said that they're adding to this potentially a desire to add in ozone somewhere in here, feeling the need. I guess there is a pilot moving forward in San Diego for DPR, and they're proposing it with ozone, which is another additional treatment process to be added to this. So in the end, summary of the maximum yields.
Joshua, just the RO process here, would that be using essentially the RO process we're building for Desal?
Same process, but a different recovery, different membranes. The recovery on this is more like 80% versus 45% because the salt concentrations are drastically different. We're talking about 1,500 TDS versus 30,000 TDS. So they did look at augmenting seawater with treated IPR, DPR type of situation, but it didn't. We still would have 45% loss in that water coming in. It didn't have a significant change in the losses, so it kind of was a diminishing return on that investment.
What's the land area requirement to do this?
For DPR, we have some information on that. Basically, we were able to fit it into about an 1.5 acre site. Mm-hmm. So alternative 1A, which was a combination of our continuing to operate some level of our recycled water system, and DPR could generate potentially 7,000 acre feet a year. Again, I preface it with I think that's very optimistic, and so did the technical advisory panel. As such, you can all see that all the options were roughly around that combination. With DPR, there are more loss because the treatment process, you are still going to have a waste product with that process. I think that'll be the next big thing to tackle, is how that waste gets treated before it gets put back out into the ocean or whatever happens to it. I think there will be extensive needs for treatment potentially there. Final summary of all the alternatives. So this is where we just broke down all the various alternatives, provided some detail. I'm just pulling out one of them, which was 1A, just kind of showing how that would work. And you basically have your treatment plant, which should be located, in this case, right across the street from the wastewater treatment plant. You'd have your two different flows of NPR and DPR in this case. With the DPR, you may produce 6,000 acre-feet of actual usable water. You would still have about 1,500 acre-feet of rejected water that would need to be discharged to the ocean as brine. And then we went through the benefits and how to maximize that. This particular solution, which I'll provide a little more information on, we looked at reclaiming our recycled water line as a transmission line. This alternative had us taking recycled, or this advanced treated water, direct potable reuse, up to Laurel and using it as a surface water augmentation. And I do believe this is probably the most viable option for the city long term, and it will continue to be something we kind of follow. This was just kind of trying to understand the spacing and needs. This is the city's annex yard, so current annex yard operations would need to be relocated for this to happen, but we have Laguna Channel right here, 101's back here, this is Yananali, the desal plant's right here. This is just kind of a rough layout of how a advanced treated water treatment facility might utilize the space. There is the need for some equalization storage on site, and then also some storage and what do you want to call it, contact time with the treated water before it's put into a transmission main and either sent up to Laurel, which again is not currently, there's no current regulations for this, but this is currently where I think things are headed, and this is what San Diego is piloting, a similar situation where they're augmenting their surface water supply. So we went through a similar screening, and the two alternatives that were considered viable. DPR, there were 4 alternatives that passed all screening criteria except for one, and that was the capacity issue, which again feeds right into the long-term water supply plan, something we can revisit. Just the limited availability of effluent from El Estero. There is potentially an option in the future where we might be able to take Montecito Sanitary District's wastewater. It's not significant, but it would be one way if we were talking about a regional potable reuse facility. We might boost our production long-term. IPR alternatives did not meet additional study criteria, insufficient groundwater storage capacity, regardless of available effluent. Several alternatives discounted. Use of the advanced water treatment product water for diluting intake water. We did look at that. Due to the low recovery rate and the high product water loss, it was deemed infeasible. Seawater intrusion barrier, we did look at this as well, and not effective due to excessive water loss. And then, and these are similar outcomes for other projects that we're looking at these as well. And then IPR by surface spreading, unfortunately, given our topography, there just wasn't a good application of it within the city or its surrounding area until you get out into Goleta and Carpinteria. So next steps, I have been in discussions about forming a DPR coalition and kind of setting the stage for that. You might recall our discussion, we were pushing for potable reuse regulations to get moving. We even sent a letter from the city to the state board asking them to, put some real deadlines to this and move it along. And in late 2016, they finally reached consensus that it was feasible to develop regulations. They did feel like there was a path forward, which was a major milestone. In my conversations with our Kurt Souza, he did believe that within the next year we should actually see some hard dates given to development of regulations. His best guess was somewhere between 5 and 7 years before we'd see regulations developed. So in the meantime, what we're doing is the city is teaming up with 3 other water agencies, the city of Ventura, the city of San Francisco, and the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power to put forth some options for how we would do potable reuse. It seemed that at this point, the state could probably use some real case studies of how different agencies would do potable reuse. And we feel, based on the information that we've developed from this study, that we could clearly articulate how we would do a surface water augmentation project and how it might work for us, and basically put all that information together from those 4 agencies and then present that to the state board and hopefully influence their development of regulations such that when they do come out with regulations, they speak directly to some of the options or the particular option that's most feasible to us. So, in summary of all this information, again, this is, I think, very helpful information and will be used in the next long-term water supply plan update. Certainly that update, as we just talked about, will have to reflect the new drought of record, pending Cachuma environmental decisions, pending reassessment of the Cachuma operational yield, and I think reflect the new normal for water usage and conservation in this community. So lots of changes coming forth in the next update, and I think this information will feed nicely into that, along with other potential options as we discussed, water banking opportunities and potentially there's local water banking opportunities. So all that kind of feeding into a pretty significant and I think comprehensive update. I would think our next update is probably going to take a good 2 years to go through that, and I'm envisioning bringing on some consultants to help us with that effort so that we get good public engagement and involvement, and it's a very comprehensive document. I think we've got just so many things that are going to be different this time around. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
So, and buried in there, you said what you thought the future of direct potable reuse was that advanced treatment plant down there, and then a recapture of the recycled water piping up to Laurel, and from there it would be distributed?
Yeah, so we're looking at 2 different things. So the current recycled water system goes all the way up to the golf course. So this alternative looked at reusing that line and then extending it from the golf course up to Laurel. There are some capacity issues potentially.
Going to be my next question, or is that when you're looking for, so really where I wanted to go with that is they're probably, because who planned then, right? Mm-hmm. And then, so when we're doing other things like the other project, wherever it is on solving the conveyance to the upper part of city for desal water, when we have opportunities and we're putting a trench in, are we thinking 20, 30 years out and at least making a case that laying 2 sets of pipe or, double the capacity or something like that when we're doing this stuff?
That's right. I actually have that in my next presentation to kind of talk about the desal conveyance pipeline and what's kind of gone into the thought process on that.
Okay.
But yes, that the thought process there is we're headed back towards Cater. We're in that direction. It also potentially could be used because I think the policy discussion that we'll have to decide is, do we want to continue to provide non-potable water when it could all be repurposed as potable water? And I think that'll be an interesting discussion.
Yep.
And kind of along those same lines, if we did get it up to Laurel Reservoir, would that still be an IPR project?
Currently the state, I'm going to provide this as a great segue to my discussion with Kurt Souza on this, is that the state is actually moving in a direction to get away from potentially the labels of DPR and IPR, wanting to go to calling it potable reuse, just general, because one of the things that we want to distinguish is nowhere in any of these discussions are we talking about a flange to flange, this idea of going directly into the system with this water. I don't think anybody is contemplating that, and I think the state clearly landed that they don't want to contemplate that right now. And so really wanting to focus on this idea of potable reuse, surface augmentation, groundwater augmentation as kind of the alternatives for potable reuse, and developing guidelines and regulations that support that. And so because Laurel is so small, it fits into the category right now that would be deemed direct potable reuse because the retention time in there is not very high. Ultimately, though, we'd like to see that categorized as just potable reuse and another form of an alternative to groundwater.
Okay, yeah, that's right where I was going to, because you talked about the San Diego project, and they've got a much larger reservoir, so they've got that retention time that makes it work. But
exactly, one of the things that the feedback is that we should pay close attention to watching what San Diego does. Obviously, San Diego has the money to bankroll a pilot, and they have a much larger incentive. They have issues with their outfall, and so they have. If they don't figure out an alternative to discharging to the ocean, they have major financial impacts on their wastewater discharge that they're doing because they only have an advanced primary. They do not do secondary treatment there. And so they'd have to do millions and millions of dollars in upgrades. So they are motivated a little differently there. They're motivated to make the move to potable reuse sooner. And as such, I think we want to watch them closely because their project that they're proposing, which is a surface augmentation of the Miramar Reservoir, which it's much larger than Laurel, but it's not Kachuma either. It's kind of a forebay for their surface water, and a very similar project. And they're moving forward right now, and they're basically, without regulations, they're having to just kind of pave that path. And I think it'll be a good project for us to watch and see what happens and learn from.
yeah, definitely. All right, other questions?
Not a question, but a comment. I want to thank staff for the two presentations, and Rebecca's left, and so is Bill. But I think at the last meeting, I raised some questions as to the status of where we are with the long-term water supply plan, how the changes coming at us were going to be dealt with. And I think these two reports you just brought forward helped, at least for me, give me a better picture of where we're at and the questions going forward. The change in conditions, the unknowns we have in the direction for the long-term water supply plan. I just want to thank you guys for spending a little bit of time to going back over that. And again, I think that side-to-side chart tells us all the things we need to know in terms of like the questions we're going to be dealing with in the first phase of the review of the long-term plan.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you, Joshua.
Yeah, and I'll second that as well. Appreciate that. Okay, any other comments, questions before we move on? All right, excellent. Then we'll move on to item 6C.
One brief question. We have a regularly mandated water plan that has to be turned into the state. I can't recall what the timing or the periodicity
Urban
of that
Water
is.
Management Plan.
Water master. So presumably our revised long-term water supply plan could be applied to that also.
Yeah, the urban water management plan, we just finished that. It's every 5 years. We hope we'll get some major reprieve from this drought and see it end, and we can get started on the long-term water supply plan, and that will hopefully feed into our next urban water management plan in 5 years. Yeah, and we are looking for a recommendation from the Water Commission to take this item on to council. Welcome any feedback. If you think of something after today, I'm not presenting this to council until March 7th. Wanting to make this clear and concise. And again, keep in mind that we have people coming in at various different understandings of this work, and that there is extensive materials out there for those who want to dig into this and really understand more of the data behind our outcome.
Okay, great.
I'd make the motion to move this on to council with the backing of the Water Commission. The one comment I would have is, I think it's been frustrating for a lot of us, the 10,000 acre feet threshold issue in terms of feasibility, not feasibility, and how this stuff gets moved down the pike to the long-term water plan. I think that's difficult because, in fact, I think many of us would support the lesser options in looking at some of these things at a smaller take. But, I think that's where we're at, and so I'd make the motion to move this on to council.
All right.
I'll second that, and also note that the point is well taken that the audience for your future presentations probably will have a wide range of sophistication in understanding these various issues, and so
Yeah.
good luck in dealing with that.
Yeah, and Commissioner Davis, I appreciate your feedback. We heard that loud and clear through our public hearings.
Yeah, and I think it reflected in your presentation. You have rounded the edges a little bit on that particular question, and I appreciated that in the presentation. It was a comment as well as a compliment, the fact that the presentation did take into effect the public comment that we did receive through the process. And I think you adequately dealt with it.
Yeah, this isn't the end.
Right.
Okay, I have a first and a second to present this to council. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None? Okay, super. All right, now we can move on to 6C. Drought update report. Mr. Hagmark.
All right. This is more than a 15-minute presentation, by the way. There were other items that were supposed to be on the agenda and got pulled off at the last minute because we just didn't have the staffing time to get to those. So we have a lot we could cover in here. So I expect we'll finish the rest of the meeting pretty much on this. So this is our water supply situation as it stands. Most optimistic we've seen in a long, long time. And more optimistic is what's coming tomorrow. So we're off to a good start. NOAA doesn't have anything helpful to tell us. There's equal chances of everything. As Councilmember White mentioned, we are what remains of this drought is right here in Santa Barbara, Ventura County. And interestingly enough, this storm, and I got a little information on that, seems to be just surgically targeted at this last remaining outpost of the drought. So if you hear a little bit of hope and excitement in my voice, it's hopefully to turn a corner here and get a little bit of reprieve.
Wipe that smile off your face.
I pulled up a Los Angeles Times site that had that diagram since 2013, almost month by month, so you can see it changing to right now.
That's powerful. That is a cool one. Mm-hmm. So just give just a little bit of detail, just because I'm excited to talk about it. The timing coming tonight, really bulk of the rain coming tomorrow through Saturday morning. And we are in the bullseye for this one. Just hope it doesn't slide sideways and go south. But 2 to 4 inches on the coast, 4 to 8 inches, and potentially even higher in the south-facing slopes, in particular our backcountry. Peak rain of up to 1 inch. We will be opening the city's DOC tomorrow to be responsive to any mudslides and flooding. And likewise, we're also ramping up some water resource operations to be prepared for this as well. Kind of different. Could see Kachuma come up 10 to 20 feet. It's incredible. As we've talked about before, as of this date, there is no project water in that lake yet. I mean, even though we've seen runoff, the lake is coming up. There is no water in there yet that belongs to the project because we haven't met those conditions on the river in which we would actually see water. And so I think this is the first opportunity we can see some of that. Inflows of somewhere between 20 and 40,000 acre feet. And again, there's always that possibility the storm could get knocked off and go south. But right now, they're not predicting that. So yeah, it's just taking that drought, what remains of this drought, and overlaying it with this storm rain totals is really fascinating. This is probably the biggest part of the drought is left right in here, and that's where we're intending to get some significant rain tomorrow. hopefully it doesn't let us down. Conservation for January, interesting. As the commission knows, January is always an interesting month because there really isn't much discretionary water usage. We saw January at 30%. Still good, but not where we obviously need to be in the long term. We did find and I just want to point this out, we were double counting water from the high school well. It was in our spreadsheet that it was going directly into the system, but it was actually going into the Ortega groundwater treatment plant. That's how it's plumbed. And so we came across that. It actually improved our conservation numbers only slightly. It raised it by 1%, but I thought that was kind of an interesting issue we came across and got that corrected. Gibraltar is full. It is full, and staff are, we're actually sending up an extra staff person either tonight or tomorrow morning to be on hand, but we expect significant flows through Gibraltar. Some projections are up to 8,000 CFS potentially going through there. This facility was designed to handle much more than that, so we feel comfortable at this time. I think the way that those radial arm gates are set up, each gate is set up to handle about 8,000 CFS each. So I feel like we've gotten this covered, but we will have people up there. And typically when we see these events, we do lose access temporarily when we get rock slides and stuff across the road. The only access down to Gibraltar is from the upper road from the ridge, because we expect any crossings down below to be completely buried. Water quality challenges had been improving in Gibraltar. It was really, I guess, kind of frustrating. We were getting, the TOCs had been dropping because the water coming in was actually improving. But I think with the storm event, it's going to probably pick up quite a bit of sediment and TOC again from the organics, a lot of it from the fire, and I think it's going to set us back again. But hopefully it won't be long before we can start diverting that water.
Mr. Chairman. So I mentioned earlier, we used to have a program of releasing into the top part of Mission Creek to recharge Basin 1. I don't know if the water quality in Gibraltar would be appropriate for that, if not for actually using it at Cater.
Yes, we stopped that, I think, in the early 2000s because of a concern about non-native species. There are fish that aren't necessarily native to Mission Creek, and there is a desire to make sure those fish did not pass through there, and so we have ended that practice of taking water from Gibraltar and putting it in Mission Creek. And I think Mission Creek's going to have its hands full here shortly anyway. But and then right now, so all we're diverting is water from Devil's Canyon, which that water has actually looked pretty good. That watershed didn't burn, and so we are getting, I want to say it was like 2 MGD from that, which is pretty substantial right now.
This is a really off-the-wall question, but is there a variation in the Mission Tunnel amount of infiltration water based upon seasons? I mean, during the drought, has the infiltration in Gibraltar Tunnel gone down? What happens with that?
Yeah, Mission Tunnel has gone down. It does. We've done quite a bit of work with UCSB on the age of the water coming into the tunnel, and as you can imagine, at its deepest, the tunnel's about 3,000 feet underground, and then it kind of tapers, right? And so there are portions of the tunnel that get rather quickly respond to rainfall, but the majority of the tunnel, I think the average is about 25 years for a molecule of water to get down to the tunnel, just based on they did some what's it called, isotope testing. When was the last time that water molecule was exposed to the atmosphere based on its radioactivity, yeah, I guess.
I tell you, this was off the wall. So.
Yeah, no, it is really interesting. Lake Cachuma currently at 17% of capacity. And like I mentioned, it's certainly it's 33,000, and we get 20 out of this, it's a considerable jump. Cachuma project inflows still haven't been met. There are 5 USGS stream gauges downstream in which there needs to be a live stream before we start accruing credits to the project. The other effort that we're working with, I was on the phone on Tuesday with the Bureau of Reclamation. This year we currently have a 0% allocation, and we're obviously eager if there is inflow and, after we've met all the other requirements for fish and everything else, if there is any water, we'd like to understand what that process will be for getting an allocation this year. Right now, the only water the city has in Cachuma is stuff that we've imported. And today, I believe the emergency pump barge will have been moved back to Site 1. As the reservoir was coming up, it was going to float free. The pipeline was going to float free of the piles. And so the contractor was directed to remove the piles and move the barge back to Site 1. We're certainly hopeful that we will get back to gravity flow. But in the case, if the pipeline will be there, and we'll have to go back out and set the piles and barge if we end up having to relocate it back to Site 2. I think long term, it would be nice to get that pipeline put in permanently on the bottom of the lake, such that we don't have to go through this yo-yoing back and forth. And in future droughts, we know, or if this one comes back with a vengeance, we know that Site 2 is the place that we need to be, and the pipeline to make that happen is in place and viable. So imported water, I just wanted to speak quickly. I'm sure you've all been reading about Oroville Dam, and in particular its spillway issues. I can't help but think that there was probably multiple things that went wrong, certainly to cause a disaster of that magnitude. I think at this point, we're feeling fairly confident that it won't impact us long term, except in the pocketbook. I heard $100 to $200 million to fix this problem up there. But as I understand, they've stabilized the situation, and so future allocations shouldn't be impacted by what the disaster they've had up there.
On that particular note, there was a Times article today that quoted a guy that was with an organization that sued DWR in 2005, saying that the hillside below the emergency spillway at Oroville would erode, and the federal court decided against them, against the suit, and allowed DWR to leave it the way it was. And this article suggested that the reason the court decided that was due to pressure from Metropolitan Water District. So I don't know if that's true or not, but it may be that as we deal with the state water project in many different aspects, we're sort of at the mercy of the whims of Metropolitan Water District, which is not an encouraging thought.
I think this, speaks to what we talk about all the time, which is diversifying our supplies, recognizing the vulnerabilities of the state water project. I think it certainly has been tremendously helpful in helping us to meet some of our drought demands, but it does have its shortcomings. I think the biggest one is the levees in the Delta. If those ever go, it's going to be months, if not years, before they're able to reestablish the Delta. And during that time, they're not going to be able to pass any state water through there. So, yes, every supply seems to come with its ups and downs, right? I got an email from CCWA today saying that a spill has started to occur at San Luis Reservoir, and it's not an instantaneous thing. It actually starts to occur over time, and so basically any water that has been stored in the lake is now starting to be lost to future allocations. We did, and I'm going to talk about that in my next slide. We couldn't get our water out of there fast enough, as we talked about, but we did enter into an agreement with the Metropolitan Water District to take our water and do a transfer of that water. So here's why this caught us off guard. This is the current rainfall for Northern California's 8-station index. This was the wettest winter on record, this green line here in the 80s, early 80s, and here's where we are now. the unprecedented amount of rainfall that they've gotten is what's really allowed them to run those pumps in a situation that I haven't seen, period. And so that is what's allowed them to put so much water in San Luis, which is good, except the fact that it pushes out our storage. Likewise, here's the index for the Central Valley. That's sometimes this is the one that really pushes it, because when they run the pumps at capacity, it reverses the flow of the San Joaquin River. But given that San Joaquin River is running full, there isn't a concern about that right now. So anyway, that has set us up, and we did enter into an agreement with the Metropolitan Water District. It is a 3-to-2 exchange, so we're going to get back 66% of our water. There is no cost component to this. There were 9 participants within CCWA for a total of just shy of 16,000 acre-feet of water. The city's portion was 4,600. And as I mentioned, San Luis has started to spill. And the latest is that Met remains confident they will be able to move all the water out. And I'm not exactly, I think their goal was to get it all out by the end of the month. And they still had some capacity in the reservoir. So our water right now isn't at jeopardy of being lost at this point. And then just a reminder that we still are carrying a debt of about 6,400 acre-feet that we need to pay back within the next 10 years. And the Desal project, Seawater Pump A, started up on February 6th. It has been on and off as we've been doing testing. So it's been intermittent how it's been operating. Seawater Pump B was placed on February 14th. And I'm happy to report that the barge is no longer necessary and will be departing. That barge was extremely expensive given the size of that barge, and so I'm pleased to see that work is all done. We are still looking at a potable water production sometime in April right now. Water sales agreement. We have reached general alignment on major key terms of a water supply agreement. Montecito Water District is planning to discuss these terms with its board on February 21st, if any of the commissioners are interested in attending. MW will be seeking approval for cost sharing of the conveyance pipeline design, and we will be providing, in particular Rebecca will be doing a presentation to council on February 28th. So I wanted to give a little background on the conveyance pipeline. We haven't talked too much about this, and we are gathering more information. So we're currently working on final design. The project benefits, the pipeline is essential to being able to move water, desal water regionally. It also provides the water quality benefits. One of the nuances of desal water, which is interesting, is depending on seasonality, it depends on how far out the desal water goes. And so it has a lot of, there are times of the year when we're going to have in the winter desal water going all the way out into the San Roque area. And then in the summer when there's demand in the low zone, it isn't going to go very far. So you're going to have this significant change in water quality that, isn't necessarily desirable. You want to try and have more of a consistent supply, consistent water quality. And so having this pipeline does have some benefits to the community in the sense that we would be distributing this water and blending it with other supplies that the city has. The pipeline could support future potable reuse. We have sized it sufficiently that we believe it would, maybe in combination with the recycled water line, could be extended up to Cater and or to Laurel. So the general alignment is in the right direction, and we're leaving that option open if that presents itself. The conveyance pipe. Mm-hmm.
Physically, how big is that pipe?
It's going to be a 24-inch PVC line. Mm-hmm. We've just decided to go with PVC because of its resistance to corrosion. One of the things that we have contemplated is actually using this pipeline to pump permeate, which is pure desalinated water, whether that water has just gone through potable reuse or desal, it has no minerals in it. And taking that water up there and blending it with our surface water could be not only cut down on the costs to add those minerals in, but also significantly improve our surface water as well before it would get retreated at the Cater Water Treatment Plant. So what are the criteria for moving forward with the conveyance pipeline? I think if we stay at 3125 and don't partner with Montecito, I think given our financial situation, there's no reason why we would move forward with this right now. However, if we do contemplate an expansion and or enter into a water sales agreement, I think that's really what's going to trigger the need to move forward with the conveyance pipeline.
Is this a different conveyance pipeline than the one you've talked about in the past that goes up to Mission to get to the top half of the city?
This is it.
Same one.
This is the same one. Just kind of the general layout of this. The pipeline will start here at the Desal plant on Yananali, goes over to Cayo Cesar Chavez. Right now, it would go up to Ortega, up Olive to Sola, jog over at Sola, and then up Garden to Mission. This does require, and this is part of our discussions with Montecito, it relies on existing 24-inch transition main that the city already has in place to actually make this all work. Hopefully some potential sharing of the cost of the existing transmission main that would be necessary to make this work.
How does this play into supplying Montecito Water District with water?
So, great question. Once we get the water back to this transmission main, we can force it up through the existing 24-inch that we have there on Mission, and that line goes all the way back up to Cater. And at Cater, right in front of the clear well, is where we have a diversion where we can send water south to Montecito.
A long route, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying that the blue line on there is something that would have to be built, and then the existing line is from there to Cater?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So this line, just a little details on it. It's about 15,000 linear feet of pipe. We are proposing doing an open cut construction, very similar to how we do our main replacement work. Several reasons we like that. Open cut, it's a little more traditional, meaning our local contractors can go after this work. I think we get probably a more competitive pricing for that. The timeline for doing this work there's less unknowns as they move along, and so we do feel like we did look at some directional drilling, but it gets really difficult. Where do you stage to drill that, and then there's so many unknowns when you're drilling that I think the risk runs high, and then there's only a handful of contractors probably in the nation who could do it. So the other issue is soil contamination. Again, something we come across frequently with our water main replacement work, and I feel more confident about this, that we can control this. We've done this before. This isn't, we can put in contingency for dealing with it. We can let the contractor know what we've been through a lot of these streets already, so we know which ones are probably the most contaminated. Typically, once you get up to probably Ortega, you've probably gone through most of the areas where there was poor industrial behavior in the past. So preliminary project cost estimate is $12 million. I do think that's on the high side, but we're using that right now as for our loan. Should be able to do it for less, and I'm optimistic with local contractors going after it. We could see a really good bid on that. The construction duration, somewhere between 12 and 16 months. And we hope to help wrap up final design by July. Go ahead and bid that project. And then, of course, at that point, we would be sitting on our hands waiting to see whether we entered into an agreement with Montecito or if for some reason we needed to expand the plant for ourselves.
Chairman? In terms of this becoming a regional facility, obviously you've gotten it up to where you can put it into the South Coast conduit, which would get it to Montecito and conceivably even to Carpinteria. is there some thought to run the South Coast conduit backwards and send that water to Goleta also?
No, not right now, because that water coming in from the South Coast conduit above Cater is raw water, and so we're not contemplating reversing that, but we do have connections with Goleta should that ever come about. We do have some interties, and we've been talking about maybe establishing another one that would potentially make opportunity. I think they're headed down a different road, but it could make it possible.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to go over our water supply strategy, in particular set expectations about when we think we're going to have information. So as much as things have been positive, it's still premature to celebrate. We still got a groundwater basin that's at historic lows, and we've talked about Kachuma there. We continue to plan for drought, and I think this is what's important. We're going to be looking this year, do we have adequate supplies for 3 years? If not, what kind of conservation do we need to make sure we have water for 3 years? And if that's not sufficient, then what other supplies do we need? So those will be kind of the criteria we're going to be going through to establish that. We have tentatively set March 21st as our earliest date that we would, I guess it would be Water Commission, that 17th would be the earliest in which we can conceive of having kind of a meaningful discussion about our current water supply situation and next steps. Likely it'll probably roll into April, but what this does is we want to get this question answered because this time around we're going to wait to answer the water supply decision before developing rates, because I think to develop rates based on a multitude of different water supply situations is I think is painful, and I don't think the community's in the mood for a bunch of different options, particularly some of the scarier ones. So I think what we want to do is see what our water supply situation ends up being, then develop those rates that reflect that. And so it is going to delay the implementation of water rates. Probably looking at August, maybe even September. And I have I'm getting ahead of myself, but we will be bringing, wastewater will be following its traditional timing, and we'll likely be talking with the Water Commission in March about those. So drought funding, we had some great movement on Prop 1 finally. Hannah Beth Jackson's office has been really active in trying to help us get access to Prop 1 money for Desal. And as you might remember, that got passed by the voters in November of 2014. And DWR is the one administering this money, and they have been incredibly slow to get this money out. But with Senator Jackson's support, she reached out to Bill Croyle, the new director of DWR, and he's taken an interest in this, in particular how long it's taken his staff to get this out. And he's also, given the time that it's taken to get this out, he's also been receptive to a alternative eligibility date. I think we might have talked about this previously, this idea that standard boiler language says that any work done before you get the grant is ineligible, but they're looking at making it potentially effective all the way back to when the Prop 1 was passed. So certainly more optimistic news than we've heard in a while, and there's about $100 million for desal projects in that grant. We are following the WIFA that was put out by Feinstein's office and seeing if there's anything viable in there. Most recently, and what was on your Council Agenda report, was the USBR Water Smart drought response program. We had talked about this. There was only $2 million put in there this year. It's pretty minuscule. But having said that, we think we have a good chance at getting something. So we went ahead and threw our name in the hat for that. And with it, we have to get a resolution passed by the council. And so that's why I tried to get that in there quickly so that we could meet that grant timeline. And so that was in your packet today. but you will not be taking any action on that. Just more of an informational for you. And then we just presented to Council a state revolving fund loan, which you heard in January, but we just did that with Council. So water rates, I kind of we'll just go over the schedule here. April, give direction to the rate consultant. Again, that's predicated on having our water supply strategy kind of ironed out. May, June, seek approval for the rate notice. July, hold a public hearing, and actually, the public hearing could be probably August as well, July, August. So that's what we're hoping as probably the better case scenario. And then wastewater rates, again, will follow probably traditional noticing and adoption by June 30th. And then water conservation, we just had a simple message today, rain on, sprinklers off. It's pretty simple, and yet most people have their sprinklers or their irrigation system on timers and forget about it. And, if we can save some water by just letting people know that it should be off. I think it could be off probably now for a month or two. So that completes our presentation for today.
All right, great, thank you. Anybody have any questions or anything? Kind of hit them while we were talking about it, so. Okay, we'll move on to item number 7, the Water Resources Manager's Report.
Commissioners, I'm happy to just, we can sit here and you guys want to just look through it and ask any questions. I think we've gone over a lot of this stuff already in depth. Maybe I can highlight that we have currently have 3 spills this year, and certainly not off to a fantastic start, but some of these are kind of suspicious spills, and so we'll be investigating them further. When I say suspicious, of whether they're actually a private spill or a public spill. So we're looking into that some more. And expect in the next probably 2 months, I'll have Lisa Royal come back to provide a summary of the collection system 2016 operations.
The spike in the El Estero influent flow, is that due to rain? Or?
Yeah. I can speak on the last page, the pass-through. Probably one of my major frustrations. I was on the phone twice this week with the Bureau. Part of their explanation to us previously is that because of the drought, they haven't had the staff resources to put to completing our pass-through Warren Act agreement. And so using their own words against them, I was on the phone with them this week saying, okay, we're the only ones left in the drought. Based on your criteria before, I'd like the full resources of the Bureau put to helping the city finish this. I think we are close. Let's get it done. And now they're telling me they're worrying about flood issues, and I told them that's insulting to tell me you're distracted by flood issues right now. But anyway, they have agreed to meet weekly, which is a big move, at least to hold them accountable for the steps that they need to do. Mr. Ferguson has been writing them and contacting them frequently, but I think having weekly meetings will help kind of elevate this issue and hopefully get some action out of them. Unfortunately, we've probably lost over 2,000 acre-feet of water this year so far because not having the pass-through agreement in place, and we expect to lose about 3,000. That's the maximum diversion that we would get in a pass-through situations, which is really unfortunate. So that concludes anything I have on this. Any questions? Happy to answer.
All right. I don't have any further questions or comments. Anybody else? No? All right.
Just to note that it's nice to see that uptick on the Kachuma graph.
Slight little U shape there. That is kind of nice. Okay, all right, next meeting is Thursday, March 18th, 9 o'clock.
Yeah, just to let you know, I won't be here next month, so
Okay.
let you know ahead of time.
Alrighty. Meeting adjourned.